Our goal in this project is to identify new biomarkers and determine the earliest changes in the brain in patients that are at the early stage of dementia with Lewy bodies. So the patients we are planning to recruit will have mild cognitive impairment or early dementia with Lewy bodies, and we use imaging as a window into the pathology that is progressing in the brain, starting from these very early stages. And these findings can help us understand the disease processes for designing clinical trials and discovering new targets at this early stage where they would be the most effective. And we are planning to follow our patients through the end of 5 years of this current grant cycle with annual follow-ups to determine the rate of progression of the disease process with imaging, CSF, blood-based biomarkers, and we're planning to do sleep studies as well for identification of novel biomarkers of sleep. And all of our data and samples and images will be collected and submitted to the NINDS repository, the Parkinson's Disease Biomarkers Program, and it will be stored there for other researchers perhaps to access and maybe investigate other hypotheses in this rich repository of samples and images.
The first 5 years was focused on those individuals with overt dementia with Lewy bodies. As Dr. Kantarci was just describing, this is more focused on prodromal DLB, and more specifically mild cognitive impairment associated with Lewy bodies.
I think this is a really important question because all of our data is now stored in the Parkinson's Disease Biomarkers Program, and other researchers can have access to that data to investigate hypotheses that we are not investigating in our current grant. And I think this would be really helpful to generate new data, even new analysis off of our data. So I don't see this data set being just answering the questions we're asking in this project, but also helping others investigate other questions that we may not be able to do or didn't think of. So I think that in that way, it's a really rich repository. And it also may help drug companies and other investigators in the clinical trials or treatment fields to identify new targets, to use biomarkers for designing clinical trials.
Yes, as Dr. Kantarci was just describing with the clinical trial infrastructure, we've heard from many patients, and as part of the ADRD summits, clinical trials in DLB are critical and they're the top priority. And the ability to follow individuals longitudinally with a deep phenotyping, with clinical assessments, neuropsychological testing, biomarker acquisition, including a number of neuroimaging studies, this is critical to study the natural history. And we hear quite often from our colleagues in industry, how do we optimally design clinical trials? And without this longitudinal natural history study, it's been very challenging. So hopefully this will be very informative for clinical trial design. It's also important to emphasize that we care for the individuals that we follow as part of this program, and trying to make this as much of a two-way street as possible. They're obviously helping advance the science science. We're also trying to optimize management, whether it's through medication or non-medication approaches. And so I think this is clearly beneficial, and we hear this often from patients and family members, how beneficial it is to them to be part of this program.